Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 2nd and tonight's classic is Misery. Misery is notable for being one of the few horror/thriller movies to win an Academy Award. This is for Best Actress and it was given to Kathy Bates. The rest of the movie I would say is pretty good too. I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Now I have read the book and I hate to be that guy. I do think that the book was a little bit better, but this was a really good movie and a pretty faithful adaptation of the book. The plot is basically that there's this author, Paul Sheldon. He writes a bunch of romance novels, even though he kind of has grown to hate the romance novels that he's written. He gets in a car crash and he's saved by a woman named Annie Wilkes. And Annie Wilkes happens to be her number one fan in the whole wide world. And when she reads his most recent book and finds out that he killed her favorite character, she flips out, holds him hostage at her house and makes him write a book where Misery is brought back to life. And the whole thing is him trying to escape and delving more into the insanity that is Annie Wilkes. At the risk of stating the obvious, Kathy Bates does a very good job in her performance as Annie. It didn't absolutely blow me away. It didn't impress me the way that Essie Davis's performance in The Babadook impressed me from last year, but it is really good. In the book, especially, Annie Wilkes is this very complicated character, and they definitely capture that very well, and a lot of that is because of Kathy Bates' performance. The thing about Annie Wilkes is that she keeps flipping around from one emotion to the other very quickly. Sometimes she's a fangirl, other times she's a loving motherly type, and other times she's just completely crazy. Something that is a big part of the book, but it's definitely played up a lot, I feel, in this movie, is that as a base, it's making you be afraid of something that normally nobody would be afraid of, which is just some middle-aged woman. I don't know if she was quite as scary as I think that they were trying to go for. A lot of times when she's just screaming, sometimes it's almost a little bit comedic, but there are other scenes where when she's yelling and screaming, it actually does come off as very frightening. I think most of that comes from just how quickly she shifts from one side of her personality to another. The guy who plays the author, Paul Sheldon, the actor's name is James Cain, he does pretty good, and he gets the job done. I'd say that something that got lost in translation when they made this into a movie is that in the book, they delve a lot more into the psychological aspect of it. Not just in Annie, but also in Paul. They go a little bit deeper into some of the stuff, the way they think of each other, the way that they view each other. And it's a very deep look into the mind of Paul as well as Annie. And I understand that that wouldn't translate that well into a movie. If they actually tried to fit all of that development into the movie, you would end up with something like the Shining miniseries, where they're basically just talking for 3 hours. But I feel like they could have done a little bit more. One thing from the book that is done very well in this movie is the sort of cat and mouse psychological warfare between Paul and Annie. Because neither of them are idiots. They both are pretty smart. They figure out new ways to outwit each other. And it's a game where you think that Paul is about to win, but then it tips over in Annie's favor. Or you think Annie's about to lose, or an accident happens. And of course it all culminates into the climax, but I won't talk about that until the spoiler part of the video. While not quite as good as the book, I do think that the Misery movie is very well done. If you want to know the story but don't really feel like reading the book, I'd say that the movie is a pretty good substitute for it. It's pretty good, and if it looks like it might be your thing, check it out. Alright, spoilers start now. One thing that Paul learns later on in the movie is that Annie isn't just a sociopath, she's also a multi-murderer. She has a scrapbook in her house where, she keeps newspaper clippings, and I don't really know why she would keep newspaper clippings of her own crimes in her house like that, but whatever. And she is a nurse, and it's implied that she killed, one of her competition at school. It's implied she killed, her father, and it's implied that she killed a bunch of babies, but she got out from prison, and I guess was, on pension or something, because you never see her work in the movie. She just, watches game shows all day. So yeah, Sheldon is in even more danger than he originally thought. Definitely the most intense/scary part of the movie is the hobbling scene, which has grown infamous over the years. Annie Wilkes finds evidence that he's been able to get out of bed and like pick the lock of his door and sneak around. So what she does is that she restrains him to the bed and breaks his legs again. At the beginning, the car crash that he was in broke his legs, but she breaks it such he can't walk. She called it hobbling. Now, in the book, actually, she cut his feet off and like used like a stove to cauterize the wounds instantly. But I guess that would have been overkill. And the scene is very gruesome otherwise. Like, they don't really show you explicitly, but you can feel it. Like, that's a pretty good moment of acting on James Caan's part right there. A police officer goes to her house and questions her, and he ends up finding Paul. And Annie kills him, and she says that she's going to kill both of them. But he like convinces her to wait until he finishes writing the book that she made him write. And he's able to hit her where it really hurts by burning the finished book that she was made especially for her right in front of her. And he like attacks her, and he manages to overpower her. By the way, the blood in this movie is not very convincing. It's bright red. It's hammer blood, basically, but that's not too much. It was just something I wanted to bring up. So they have their little brawl, and Paul does end up overpowering Annie. There is one of those, you think she's dead, but she's not really dead moments, but yeah. Now, one thing that was in the book that I wish they had kept in the movie, they don't indicate that it was the case here. In the book, he actually does keep the book. He just burned a bunch of blank pages of paper in front of Annie in the book and kept it because he thought it was the best book he ever wrote, and he published it and dedicated it to her. But in this one, they don't really imply that. I guess it's kind of a minor detail, but it was something cool from the book that I wish that they had kept in the movie. And of course, it ends with Paul recovering, but still being mentally traumatized by the thing. And it ends with him seeing a waiter that walks up to him, he's at a restaurant at the time. And he imagines that it's Annie, but it's not. It's just somebody else. Annie died. And then the waiter says, "Hi, are you Paul Sheldon?" And he said, "Yeah." And she says, "I just want you to know that I'm your biggest fan." And then he just has this really uncomfortable look on his face, and the movie ends. There are definitely a few more comedic moments in this movie than I thought there would be, to be honest. While Misery isn't the best possible adaptation of the book, I still think there were some things they could have done in order for it to be better. It still is pretty good. I would recommend the book more, but if that's not your thing, check out this movie. You'll pretty much get the same thing. Alright, that's the end of today's video. I'll see you tomorrow.